Welcome to the Flora Sage Podcast, a place where we help you create a life you're excited about. In today's podcast episode, we are going to look at stories. This is one of my favorite topics because it impacts people so greatly and so many people are oblivious to it. I was one of these people back in the day until I really reflected on a story that I was telling a group of my friends and realized I'm like, you know what? I'm done. I'm just done with this. So every time we tell a story, we are breathing new life into it. I want you to think about that. When you tell a story about a bad experience, something you dislike or hate, a wrong that has happened, you are reactivating that energy in your energy field and in your life. Now, there's this story that I heard one time that blew my mind. And it's a story of two brothers who grew up with a father that was an addict and a mother that was abusive. Years later, one of the brothers was successful and happy and healthy, and the other brother was an addict and living on the streets. And when each brother was asked how they ended up where they did, they both gave the same answer. I'm here because my father was an addict and my mother was abusive. Isn't that profound? I actually heard this when I was in high school and it stuck with me, and it didn't hit me until that one day when I was telling my friends the story and I was like, oh no, I'm doing it. So before you tell any more stories to yourself or others, I want you to ask yourself this question. Do I want to breathe new life into this story, or do I want to tell a new story? Do I want to breathe new life into this story, or do I want to tell a new story? So how do you tell a new story? Well, you change how you view it. Begin by focusing on the aspects of the story that show you just how strong and resilient you truly are. How did those events or that event, that story, how did that direct you to the place that you're at now in your life? Now, we're not discounting what happened in the past. That's not what we're doing here, because your past matters, okay? We're merely regaining our power around these stories, around these events, and around these traumas in our life. These stories are our internal narrative and our internal dialogue that can impact not only our life, but the generations to come. There's a fabulous book called It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolin. And in the book, he talks about how trauma is stored in our DNA from previous generations. If you haven't read or listened to the book, I highly recommend that you do so. I'll post the link in the show notes. It's a fabulous, fabulous book. But I'm telling you, when we rewrite these stories, it literally changes our DNA and makes us stronger. So today, and over the next few weeks, next few months, next few years, give yourself permission to think of those stories that you tell and rewrite them, retell them from a place of power, and just watch how your life changes. Years ago, a friend of mine talked about how things don't happen to us, they happened for us. And since then, I heard her say it about 20 years ago. And since then, I've heard it quoted by a lot of different people, but that is so true. Instead of looking at what has happened to us, let's change the narrative. Let's change the dialogue and ask ourselves, of all these things that have happened in our life, how did they happen for us? What was the positive ripple effect? How did that empower us? How did that make us who we are today? Years ago on my YouTube channel, I shared how when I was single and in a very bad place, I mean, I was literally at rock bottom in my life and had no self-esteem, no self-confidence. I had an affair with a married man and was totally blind, totally oblivious to the consequences. And then about 3 months into it, I woke up and was like, what in the hell am I doing? And I was disgusted with myself. And instead of letting that ruin me, instead of letting it control me, I said, never again will I be allowed to be manipulated in this form and in this fashion. And because of that situation, I allowed myself to look at the various situations, the various scenarios, the various stories I was telling myself in that point in my life. And those stories that I was telling myself completely disempowered me. It stripped me of all of my self-confidence, all of my self-worth. I literally was at the bottom of the barrel. I had, like I said, no self-confidence, no self-worth. I was just the scum of the world. But I changed the narrative. I changed the dialogue. And that situation is one of the main reasons why I am a coach today. When you listen to people's stories, I really want you to listen to them and listen to how, when they tell the story, they truly are breathing new life into that story, into that energy. It's like a deflated balloon. All of these stories. So picture a room in your home that has nothing but shelves on it. And all of these shelves have these deflated balloons. And every balloon has the label of a story. Like on mine, I have getting kicked out when I was 16. I have my mother passing away at 12. My affair with a married man. My 3 divorces. All of these things. Being in the Marine Corps. Being a single mom. Going to the beach with my kids. Living in South Africa. Visiting Hawaii the first time. The second time. The third time. Going to the zoo. Going and getting hot dogs with my boyfriend. Every random thing that we have happen in our life, we have a balloon on a shelf. And no matter where you're at, you have access to these balloons. And from time to time, we're with a group of people where we feel guided to pick up one of those balloons and blow it up by telling the story, by having those words come out of our mouth. And a story isn't just us just telling the story. What you're doing is you're bringing up that memory and allowing it to surface emotionally in our physical body. And then we translate those memories and those emotions into the spoken word. And we translate it in a way to where the people in front of us will hear it and hopefully see the big picture. And hopefully understand the impact that story has had on our life. Whether we want to tell them a funny story, a really heart-wrenching story, a sad story, a scary story, a traumatic story, whatever, or just kind of a benign random story. But either way, when we bring in these emotions and the memories and we marry those together and we form words and language, all of the words that we form are putting vibration out into the planet. And we're literally, like I said, blowing up that balloon. We're re-animating that story and giving it new life. So give yourself permission to recognize that you can continue to hold on to these stories, but you can choose to rewrite, rescript, and change the narrative of that story. Remember the two brothers. One was successful, happy, and healthy. The other brother was an addict and living on the streets. And they both told the same story. I'm an addict living on the streets because my father was an addict and my mother was abusive. Or I am successful, happy, and healthy and sober because my father was an addict and my mother was abusive. I hope that you take this podcast and allow it to impact your life in a way that you're guided to be impacted by it. Some people could be triggered. Some people could feel empowered. My hope is that this podcast will empower you to spend some time with your room of deflated balloons, with your room of stories that right now are lying dormant. And that you choose to, whenever you have the courage to, whenever you're guided to pick up that balloon and look at the label on it, whatever that label may be, and to create a new perspective, create a new inner dialogue, to create and rewrite and retell that story from a place of power. And when you do this, just watch how your life changes. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'll see you in the next podcast. If you're enjoying this content, which I hope you are, and you're applying this knowledge in your life and are seeing results, I would love to hear about your successes. Click the link in today's show notes, share your success story with me so you can help to inspire others. Also, if you've been loving these episodes, it would mean the world to me if you would rate this podcast on iTunes. A 5-star rating is what I always aim for. Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. All links mentioned are in today's show notes.